The letter trembled in Catherine Morrison's hands as tears blurred the careful script her mother had penned 3 months ago. The paper now worn soft from being read 100 times since it arrived at the trading post in Silver Creek, Montana Territory. And she sat on the wooden steps of the general store feeling more alone than she had in all her 22 years. She had come west 6 months earlier with such hope burning in her chest, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher in this rough mining town, where children ran wild and men struck silver from the earth with their bare hands and dynamite. Her father had died 2 years before, leaving her mother and 3 younger sisters struggling in their Philadelphia home, and Catherine had thought herself brave and adventurous when she boarded that train heading into territories she had only read about in books. The salary promised was 3 times what she could earn back east, enough to send money home each month and still have a little left for herself. But the reality of Silver Creek had proven harsher than any dime novel suggested. The school was a one-room building with a leaking roof and gaps between the boards wide enough to see daylight through. Half her students spoke more Norwegian or Chinese than English, their parents immigrants who had traveled even further than she had in search of fortune. The winters were brutal, the wind cutting through her thin eastern clothes like knives, and the loneliness was a physical ache in her bones. The letter brought worse news than usual. Her youngest sister, Emma, had taken ill with scarlet fever. Her mother wrote with forced cheerfulness about how the doctors said she would recover, but Catherine could read between the lines and see her mother's fear. The medical bills were mounting. The rent on their small house was 3 months overdue. Her mother had taken in sewing, but her eyes were failing and the work came slowly. Catherine pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway, hot and bitter. She had sent every penny she could spare, but it was never enough. The cost of living in Silver Creek was higher than she had anticipated, and her landlady, a stern widow named Mrs. Hedstrom, had already threatened to put her out if she fell behind on rent again. Crying never solved a problem worth solving. The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped the letter. She looked up to see a man standing at the base of the steps, his hat in his hands and concern written across his weathered face. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy: worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard use. "I apologize for startling you, miss," he said, his voice carrying a soft drawl that suggested he came from somewhere south of Montana. "I did not mean to intrude on your privacy, but I have passed by 3 times now on my errands, and each time you have been sitting here looking more heartbroken than the last." Catherine quickly folded the letter and tucked it into her sleeve, wiping at her eyes with her other hand. "I am quite all right, thank you. Just received some difficult news from home." Home being somewhere back east, I would wager. He did not move closer, respecting her space, but his expression remained kind. "I have seen that particular brand of homesickness before. Lost my own mama when I was 15, and for years after, any letter from my sister would tear me up for days." Something in his tone, the genuine understanding rather than mere politeness, made Catherine's throat tighten again. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "May I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the steps. When she nodded again, he settled himself a respectful distance away, setting his hat on the step beside him. "Name is James Corrigan. Most folks call me Corey. I work the cattle on the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of town." "Catherine Morrison," she managed, her voice still thick with tears. "I teach at the school." "I have heard about you," Corey said. "My boss's youngest boy, Tommy, talks about his teacher, Miss Catherine, all the time. Says you are the smartest person he has ever met, and you know all the state capitals by heart." Despite herself, Catherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. Tommy Rawlings was 8 years old with a gap-toothed grin and an insatiable curiosity about everything. Tommy is a bright boy. He will go far if his parents can keep him in school. His mama is determined on that point, Corey assured her. She came from nothing herself and wants better for her children. He paused, then added carefully, "Forgive me if I am overstepping, but is there something I can do to help? If it is a practical problem, maybe there is a practical solution." Catherine shook her head. "Not unless you can cure scarlet fever from 2,000 miles away or conjure money from thin air. My youngest sister is ill, my mother is drowning in debt, and I am here, useless to help them." "You are not useless," Corey said firmly. "You are sending them money every month, are you not? And teaching children who desperately need teaching, that is far from useless. It is not enough." The words burst out of her before she could stop them. "Nothing I do is ever enough. I send every penny I can spare, but it just disappears into the bottomless pit of bills and expenses, and they are still struggling, and Emma is still sick, and I cannot even go home to see them because the train fare would cost 3 months' salary." Corey was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Then he said something she did not expect. "This place can be home too, you know, if you let it." Catherine stared at him. "What?" "I know it feels impossible right now," he said, his drawl deepening slightly as he chose his words with care. "You are lonely and scared and missing the people you love. But Silver Creek does not have to be just the place you are stuck while your real life happens somewhere else. It can become home. These people, these mountains, this wild, beautiful territory, they can be yours if you open yourself to the possibility." "I do not want them to be mine," Catherine said, but even as the words left her mouth, she wondered if they were entirely true. "I want to go home." "Do you?" Corey asked gently. "Or do you want things to be the way they were before your father died and everything changed? Because those are different things, and only one of them is actually possible." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. He was right. What she mourned was not just the distance from Philadelphia, but the life she had lost, the security and innocence that could never be reclaimed. Her father was gone. Her childhood was over. Even if she returned to Philadelphia tomorrow, that old life was as unreachable as the moon. "It is not the same," she whispered. "No," Corey agreed. "It is not. But that does not mean this cannot be good in its own way. Different but good." Catherine looked down at her hands, at the worn fabric of her skirt, and the ink stains on her fingers from hours of preparing lessons. "I do not know how to do that. How to stop feeling like I am in the wrong place. I cannot answer that for you," Corey admitted, "but I can tell you what helped me. When I first came to Montana 3 years ago, I thought it was temporary. I was working to save money to buy land in Texas, where my family is from. I counted every day as one closer to leaving. But then something shifted. I stopped counting days and started living them. I made friends. I learned the names of the mountains. I found a good horse and a better dog. I let myself care about the people here." He smiled slightly. "And one day I realized I did not want to leave anymore. This had become home without me even noticing." "What about your family in Texas?" Catherine asked. "I miss them," Corey said honestly. "My sister writes every month and I write back. Last year I saved up enough to visit for Christmas, but my life is here now. My sister has her own family, her own home. I will always love her, but I do not belong in her house anymore. I belong here." Catherine felt something crack open inside her chest, a painful loosening of something she had been holding too tight. "I am afraid," she admitted in a whisper. "If I let this place become home, if I stop fighting it, it feels like I am abandoning them, like I am choosing to leave them behind." "You already left," Corey said, but his tone was kind, not cruel. "You made that choice when you got on the train, But leaving does not mean abandoning. You can love them and still build a life here. You can send them letters and money and still plant roots in Montana soil. Love is not a finite resource that you use up. It grows to fill the space you give it. A fresh wave of tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, but these felt different somehow, less like despair and more like release. I do not know if I can do this. It is so hard. Most things worth doing are, Corey said. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. But you do not have to do it alone. That is the other thing about letting a place become home. You find your people, your tribe, as the crow would say. Folks who will help carry the load when it gets too heavy. Catherine took the handkerchief and wiped her eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me. Corey picked up his hat and turned it over in his hands, studying the worn brim. When I first came to Montana, I was in a dark place. I had just lost my mama, and my father had drunk himself into an early grave a year before that. I felt like I was drowning and I came west to escape. But you cannot outrun grief, I learned. It follows you. I was working on a ranch near Helena, and I was barely holding myself together, just going through the motions. One day I broke down while I was supposed to be mending fence. Just sat down in the grass and cried like a child. He paused, a distant look in his eyes. The rancher's wife found me. She could have been annoyed that I was wasting time or embarrassed by the display or any number of things. Instead, she sat down next to me and waited until I could talk. Then she said something I have never forgotten. She said that grief is not something you get over. It is something you learn to carry, and it is easier to carry when you have help. Catherine felt her throat tighten again. That was kind of her. It saved my life, Corey said simply. So when I see someone struggling with a heavy load, I try to offer a hand. That is what folks do here. We take care of each other because this land is too hard and too beautiful to face alone. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the bustle of Silver Creek's Main Street. A freight wagon rumbled past, loaded with supplies for the mines. A Chinese merchant swept the boardwalk in front of his shop. Two children ran by chasing a hoop, their laughter bright in the afternoon air. Tell me something good about this place, Catherine said suddenly, something I might not have noticed. Corey considered the question, a slow smile spreading across his face. Have you been up to the ridge above the north pasture, the one where the aspens grow? I do not think so. In the fall, those aspens turn the brightest gold you have ever seen. The whole mountainside looks like it is on fire with color. And if you stand there in the late afternoon when the sun hits them just right, it feels like you are inside a cathedral made of light. His voice carried reverence. I have traveled through 6 territories and 3 states, and I have never seen anything more beautiful. Catherine tried to imagine it. That does sound lovely. And in the summer, there is a meadow about 2 miles east of the ranch where the wildflowers grow so thick you cannot see the ground. Purple lupine and red paintbrush, and these little yellow flowers whose name I do not know. The bees get drunk on the nectar, and the air smells so sweet it is almost overwhelming. He gestured toward the mountains rising beyond the town. And the night sky here, miss. The stars are so bright and so many that it makes you feel both very small and very much a part of something larger. Despite everything, Catherine felt a spark of curiosity. She had been so focused on her misery and homesickness that she had barely looked at her surroundings beyond noting their differences from Philadelphia. You really love it here. I do, Corey said. But I did not always. That is my point. At first, I just saw the hardship and the isolation. It took time and intention to see the beauty. I had to choose to look for it. What made you start looking? Corey's expression grew thoughtful. Partly it was Mrs. Rawlings, my boss's wife. She is from Ohio originally, and she talked about how homesick she was when she first came west. But she decided that if she was going to be here, She might as well find things to appreciate. So she started making lists in a journal. Every night before bed, she would write down 3 good things from that day. At first, she said it was hard to find 3 things. But eventually, she started noticing more and more until the hard part was choosing only 3. "That is a lovely idea," Catherine said slowly. "I started doing it too," Corey admitted. "I am not much for writing, but I would lie in my bunk at night and think of 3 things. At first it was simple stuff. The stew was good, my horse did not throw me, I saw an eagle. But over time, it changed how I saw everything. I started expecting to find good things instead of expecting hardship." Catherine tucked the handkerchief into her pocket, her tears finally subsiding. "I will try that. That is all any of us can do," Corey said. He stood and settled his hat back on his head. "Try and then try again the next day. Eventually, trying becomes living." He hesitated, then added, "I come into town most Saturdays for supplies. If you are amenable, I would be happy to show you some of those places I mentioned. The ridge with the aspens, the meadow, maybe some of the creek where you can catch trout with your bare hands if you are patient enough." Catherine looked up at him, surprised by the offer and by her own desire to accept it. "I would like that." "Next Saturday, then?" Corey asked. "I could bring an extra horse and a picnic lunch. We could make a day of it." "That sounds wonderful," Catherine said and meant it. Corey smiled, his whole face transforming with the expression. "It is a plan, then. Until Saturday, Miss Catherine." He touched the brim of his hat and turned to go, then paused and looked back. "For what it is worth, Tommy is right. You are the smartest person many of these children will ever meet, and you are giving them a gift that will last their whole lives. That matters. It matters more than you know." Before Catherine could respond, he was gone, striding down the street with the easy gait of a man comfortable in his own skin. Catherine watched him go, still clutching her mother's letter but feeling somehow lighter than she had in months. That night, lying in her narrow bed in Mrs. Hedstrom's boarding house, Catherine thought about what Corey had said. She pulled out a spare notebook she used for lesson planning and opened to a blank page. At the top, she wrote the date, June 15, 1883. Below it, after a long pause, she wrote 3 things. 1. Little Mary Chen brought me wildflowers this morning, carefully wrapped in damp moss so they would not wilt. 2. The sunset tonight painted the mountains pink and orange and made them look like something from a painting. 3. A kind cowboy reminded me that I am not as alone as I thought. She closed the notebook and set it on the small table beside her bed next to the lamp. It was not much, but it was a start. The rest of the week passed in the usual rhythm of teaching. Catherine drilled her students on their multiplication tables and had them practice their penmanship. She read to them from books donated by various townspeople, stories of adventure and exploration that made even the most restless boys sit still and listen. She mediated disputes and wiped away tears and praised good work, but something had shifted. She found herself noticing things she had overlooked before. The way the morning light came through the schoolhouse windows and made patterns on the floor. The earnest concentration on young faces bent over their slates. The pride in a mother's eyes when her son read a full sentence without help. Each night, she wrote her 3 things. Some days it was easier than others. On Wednesday, it rained so hard that the roof leaked onto her desk, and half her students stayed home, and she had to search for something positive to record. But she found it. The sound of rain on the roof was actually rather soothing, and one of her Norwegian students had finally mastered the English alphabet, and Mrs. Chen from the laundry had given her a cup of hot tea when she came in soaked to the skin. On Friday afternoon, as Catherine was cleaning the blackboard after her students had left, Mrs. Rawlings appeared in the doorway. She was a sturdy woman in her middle 30s with kind eyes and capable hands, the type of woman who could birth a calf, bake 20 loaves of bread, and still have energy left to read bedtime stories to her children. "Miss Morrison, do you have a moment?" Mrs. Rawlings asked. "Of course," Catherine said, setting down her rag. "Is everything all right with Tommy?" "Tommy is fine, Mrs. Rawlings assured her with a smile. "He is thriving under your instruction. I came on another matter entirely." She stepped into the room, looking around at the tidy space with approval. "My husband mentioned that James Corrigan plans to take you riding tomorrow to see some of the countryside." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "Yes, he was kind enough to offer." "Corey is a good man," Mrs. Rawlings said. "One of the best we have ever had working the ranch, but I wanted to offer you the use of my riding skirt and boots if you do not have appropriate clothing. We are similar in size, I think, and riding in a regular skirt is uncomfortable at best and dangerous at worst." "That is very thoughtful," Catherine said, touched by the gesture. "I confess I have never been riding outside of a carriage." "Then you are in for a treat," Mrs. Rawlings said warmly. "There is nothing quite like seeing this territory from horseback. It changes your perspective." She paused, then added, "Corey told my husband about your conversation last week. I hope you do not mind, but he was concerned about you and wanted to make sure we were aware you might need some support." Catherine did not know quite what to say. In Philadelphia, such open discussion of one's personal struggles would have been mortifying. But Mrs. Rawlings's expression held no judgment, only concern and kindness. "I have been having a difficult time," Catherine admitted. "I received bad news from home." "So I understand," Mrs. Rawlings said. She moved closer, her voice gentle. "I do not mean to pry, but if there is anything we can do to help, you need only ask. The community here takes care of its own, and you are one of us now, whether you feel it yet or not." "Everyone has been very kind," Catherine said. "Kinder than I expected. We need you," Mrs. Rawlings said simply. "Good teachers are rarer than gold in these territories, and you have a gift for it. But beyond that, you are a person deserving of kindness for its own sake." She reached into her bag and pulled out a wrapped bundle, the riding clothes. "Come by the ranch house before you set out tomorrow, and I will make sure you are properly outfitted." "Thank you," Catherine managed. "Truly," after Mrs. Rawlings left, Catherine sat at her desk for a long time, staring at the bundle of clothing. She thought about what Corey had said about letting this place become home, about finding your people. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been so focused on what she had lost that she was blind to what she might gain. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the sky that particular shade of blue that seemed unique to Montana, so vivid it almost hurt to look at directly. Catherine woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She dressed carefully in her regular clothes, then packed the borrowed riding outfit in a bag to change into at the ranch. The walk to the Double R Ranch took just over an hour, following the wagon road that curved through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. Catherine had never been this far from town before, and she found herself slowing to take in the landscape. The mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer warmth. Wildflowers she could not name splashed color across the fields, and birds she had never seen in Philadelphia called from fence posts and scrub bushes. The ranch house came into view as she crested a low hill. It was a sprawling log structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney, surrounded by a collection of barns, corrals, and outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the near pasture, their red and white hides bright in the morning sun. Beyond them, she could see horses running in a larger enclosure, their manes and tails streaming like banners. Mrs. Rawlings must have been watching for her, because she came out onto the porch before Catherine even reached the front steps. "Right on time," she said approvingly. "Come inside and change. Corey is saddling the horses now." The ranch house interior was warm and lived in, with furniture that showed the wear of a large family and walls decorated with pictures cut from magazines and children's drawings. Mrs. Rawlings led Catherine to a bedroom and left her to change in privacy. The riding skirt was split like trousers but cut to look like a skirt, made of sturdy brown wool. The boots fit well enough with an extra pair of socks. Catherine braided her hair and pinned it up securely, then examined herself in the small mirror above the dresser. She looked different somehow, less like a Philadelphia schoolteacher and more like someone who belonged in this rough country. When she emerged, Mrs. Rawlings looked her over with a critical eye and nodded. "Perfect. Here, take this hat. The sun is fierce and you will burn without it." She handed Catherine a wide-brimmed hat similar to what the cowboys wore. "And these gloves, the rains can chafe." "You are very kind," Catherine said, overwhelmed by the woman's generosity. "Nonsense," Mrs. Rawlings said briskly. "We women have to stick together out here. Now, let me pack you a proper lunch. I do not trust any cowboy to bring adequate food." She bustled off toward the kitchen, leaving Catherine to follow. 20 minutes later, Catherine found herself standing beside two saddled horses in the ranch yard, holding a basket packed with enough food for a small army. Corey emerged from one of the barns, leading his own mount, a tall bay with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. "You look ready for adventure," he said, smiling at her. He gestured to the smaller of the two horses, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her face. "This is Daisy. She is the steadiest horse we have, perfect for a first rider. She will take care of you." Catherine approached the horse cautiously. Daisy turned her head and regarded her with what seemed like patient curiosity. Catherine reached out and touched the soft nose, marveling at the warmth and the whiskers that tickled her palm. "She likes you," Corey observed. "Here, let me help you mount." He showed her where to put her foot in the stirrup and how to swing her leg over. It took 2 tries and was far less graceful than she would have liked, but finally she was seated in the saddle, looking down at the ground from an alarmingly high vantage point. "How do I make her go?" Catherine asked, gripping the saddle horn with both hands. "Relax first," Corey said, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Horses can feel tension and it makes them nervous. Daisy knows what she is doing. Just sit easy and hold the reins gentle. Light pressure on the left rein turns her left, right rein turns her right. Little squeeze with your legs tells her to walk, and pull back gentle on both reins tells her to stop. But honestly, she will mostly just follow my horse, so you do not need to do much." He swung into his own saddle with the ease of long practice, settling the basket of food into a pack behind him. "Ready." Catherine took a deep breath and nodded, even though she felt anything but ready. They started out at a sedate walk, heading away from the ranch buildings toward the open country beyond. Corey kept his horse close to Daisy's shoulder, occasionally offering gentle instructions or encouragement. At first, Catherine was rigid with tension, convinced she was going to fall at any moment. But gradually, as Daisy plodded along with unflappable calm, Catherine began to relax. She loosened her death grip on the saddle horn and started to notice her surroundings. The perspective from horseback was entirely different from walking. She sat higher, could see farther, felt more a part of the landscape rather than just moving through it. The rhythmic sway of the horse's gait was actually rather soothing once she stopped fighting it. "There," Corey said after a while, "you are starting to get the feel of it. How are you doing?" "Better than I expected," Catherine admitted, "although I suspect I will be very sore tomorrow." "Almost certainly," Corey agreed cheerfully, "but it is worth it. We are heading up to that ridge I told you about, the one with the aspens. Even though it is summer now and not fall, it is still a beautiful spot. You can see half the territory from up there." They rode in companionable silence for a while, following a trail that led steadily upward through pines and rocky outcroppings. Birds called from the trees, and once Catherine caught a glimpse of a deer bounding away through the underbrush. The air smelled of pine sap and sun-warmed stone, and something indefinable that was just the scent of wild places. "Tell me about your family," Corey said eventually. "If you are comfortable talking about them." Catherine hesitated, then decided that talking might actually help. "My father was a clerk for a shipping company. Nothing glamorous but steady work, and he loved us dearly. He used to bring home damaged books from the ship's cargoes, ones that could not be sold, and he would read to us every evening. That is where I learned to love stories. He sounds like a good man." "He was," Catherine said softly. "When he died, it was unexpected, a fever that came on fast and took him in a matter of days. We barely had time to understand he was truly ill before he was gone. And afterwards, we discovered that he had not been as careful with money as we thought. There were debts we did not know about. The small amount he had saved vanished almost immediately. That must have been terrifying." "It was," Catherine admitted. "My mother tried to keep us from seeing how bad things were, but I was old enough to understand. I started looking for work, but respectable positions for women are limited, and the pay is terrible. Then I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana, and the salary seemed like a fortune. I applied immediately." "Do you regret coming?" Corey asked. Catherine considered the question. A week ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. Now, she was not so sure. "I regret that my family needs me and I am not there, but I do not know if I regret being here, if that makes sense. I am still figuring that out." "That is fair," Corey said. They rode a bit further than he asked. "What are your sisters like?" Catherine's face softened. "Louisa is 20 and quite practical. She is the one keeping everything together at home, I think, managing the household and keeping track of the bills. Margaret is 18 and romantic. She wants to marry for love, which is a luxury we cannot afford, but I cannot fault her for dreaming. And Emma, the youngest, is 15 and full of life, or she was before she got sick." Her voice caught. "She wants to be an artist. She is always drawing pictures of everything she sees." "They are lucky to have you looking out for them," Corey said. "I am not looking out for them very well from 2,000 miles away," Catherine said bitterly. "You are doing what you can," Corey countered. "That is all anyone can do. And it sounds like Louisa is capable of managing things at home. You are not abandoning them. You are giving them options they would not have otherwise." Catherine wanted to argue, but the truth of his words was undeniable. Before she could formulate a response, they emerged from the trees onto a rocky ridge, and the view stole whatever she had been about to say. The world spread out below them in a vast panorama of mountains and valleys, forests and grasslands, all bathed in golden morning light. The sky seemed impossibly large, stretching from horizon to horizon without a single cloud to mar its perfection. Far below, she could see Silver Creek, tiny as a toy village, and the thin ribbon of the creek itself winding through the landscape. Beyond that, more mountains rose in successive waves, each range fainter and bluer than the last, until they faded into the hazy distance. "Oh," Catherine breathed. "Oh my." "I told you it was worth the climb," Corey said, satisfaction in his voice. He dismounted and came to help Catherine down from Daisy's back. She was stiff and awkward getting out of the saddle, but he steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow until she found her footing. "In the fall," Corey said, gesturing to the grove of slender white-barked trees behind them, "these aspens turn gold. The whole ridge looks like it is on fire. But even in summer, it is something special." He led the horses to a patch of grass where they could graze and pulled the basket of food from his saddle pack. Mrs. Rawlings always overpacks. "Come, let us eat and enjoy the view." They settled on a flat rock overlooking the valley, and Catherine discovered that the ride had given her an appetite. Mrs. Rawlings had packed fried chicken, fresh bread with butter, hard-boiled eggs, cheese, apples, and a jar of lemonade packed in damp cloths to keep it cool. They ate in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily in the thermal currents far below. "Do you miss Texas?" Catherine asked eventually. Corey considered the question, his gaze on the distant mountains. "Sometimes. I miss my sister, and there are things about Texas that Montana cannot replicate. The food is different, for one thing. Nobody here knows how to make proper biscuits, and I would kill for good barbecue. But the land itself? No, I do not miss it. Texas is flat where I come from and hot as blazes in summer. This country suits me better. It has room to breathe and it rewards effort. A man can build something here that lasts." "Is that what you want to do? Build something?" "Eventually," Corey said. "I have been saving my wages for 3 years now. Another 2 or 3, and I will have enough to buy land of my own, start a small herd. Nothing fancy but mine, a place I can be proud of." "That is a good dream," Catherine said. "What about you?" Corey asked. "If you could have anything, what would you want?" Catherine was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "I want my family to be safe and well. That is the most important thing. But for myself," she hesitated, trying to articulate desires she had barely admitted to herself. "I want to wake up in the morning and feel excited about the day ahead instead of just enduring it. I want to do work that matters and have people around me who care. I want to feel at home in my own skin wherever I am." "Those are good wants," Corey said. "Achievable ones too, I think. The work you are already doing matters whether you believe it yet or not. And the rest will come with time if you let it. You sound very certain." "I am certain of this," Corey said, turning to look at her directly. "You are braver than you give yourself credit for. It takes courage to leave everything you know and come west alone. It takes courage to stand in front of a classroom full of children every day and try to fill their heads with knowledge. And it takes courage to keep going when you are lonely and scared and not sure you made the right choice. You have all that courage already inside you. You just need to trust it." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the tears she had shed on the general store steps. These felt cleaner somehow, like the release of something that needed to be let go. "Thank you," she whispered, "for today and for last week and for seeing me when I felt invisible." "You could never be invisible," Corey said softly. "You shine too bright." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Catherine felt something shift between them, a new awareness that made her breath catch. Then Corey looked away, giving her space to collect herself, and began to pack up the remains of their lunch. "There is more to see if you are up for it," he said. "The meadow I mentioned is not far from here, and there is a creek where the water is so clear you can count the pebbles on the bottom. But we can also head back if you are getting tired." "I want to see it," Catherine said, surprised by her own certainty. "I want to see everything." Corey's smile was like sunrise. "Then let us ride." They spent the rest of the day exploring, and Catherine found herself falling a little bit in love with the Montana territory, despite herself. Corey showed her the meadow with its riot of wildflowers, and she dismounted to walk among them, running her hands through the soft petals and breathing in the honey-sweet scent. He took her to the creek, where they sat on the bank and watched trout dart through the crystal water like living shadows. He pointed out animal tracks in the mud and taught her to identify different bird calls, and throughout it all, they talked. Corey told her stories about his childhood in Texas, about his sister who had practically raised him after their parents died, about the various adventures and misadventures that had brought him to Montana. Catherine found herself opening up in return, sharing memories of her father and stories about her students, even laughing at some of the more absurd challenges of frontier teaching. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was lowering toward the mountains and Catherine's whole body ached from the unaccustomed exercise. But her heart felt lighter than it had in months. "Thank you for today," she said as they rode side by side through the golden late afternoon light. "It helped more than I can say." "It was my pleasure," Corey said. "And Miss Catherine, if you are willing, I would like to do this again. Not next week, perhaps, since you will likely need time to recover from riding, but soon. There is a lot more of this territory to see, and I would enjoy showing it to you." "I would like that very much," Catherine said, and meant it with her whole heart. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Rawlings insisted Catherine stay for dinner, and Catherine was too tired and too grateful to refuse. The meal was chaotic and warm, with Tommy and his siblings chattering about their days and Mr. Rawlings teasing his wife about her cooking while clearly adoring every bite. Catherine sat at the big table and felt, for the first time since coming west, like she belonged somewhere. Corey walked her back to town as the stars were coming out, leading both horses so Catherine could ride if she wanted, but she chose to walk despite her aching legs. The night air was cool and smelled of sage, and the stars were as magnificent as Corey had promised, strewn across the sky in glittering profusion. "I had a wonderful time," Catherine said as they paused at the edge of town. "So did I," Corey said. He hesitated, then added, "Miss Catherine, I hope this does not overstep, but I find myself eager for your company. You are intelligent and kind and braver than you know, and I would very much like to spend more time getting to know you better, if that is something you might welcome." Catherine's heart fluttered in her chest. "I would welcome that," she said softly. Corey's smile was visible even in the starlight. "Then I will see you soon. Sleep well, Miss Catherine." "Good night, Corey," she said, using his given name for the first time. That night in her narrow bed, Catherine wrote in her journal, 1. I saw views today that took my breath away. 2. I laughed more than I have in months. 3. A kind cowboy is helping me see that maybe, just maybe, this place could be home. The next weeks fell into a new rhythm. Catherine taught during the week, pouring her energy into her students, and finding more satisfaction in the work than she had allowed herself to feel before. She made efforts to connect with the other townspeople, accepting invitations to church socials and ladies' aid meetings that she had previously declined. Slowly, tentatively, she began to weave herself into the fabric of Silver Creek's community, and on Saturdays, Corey came to town. Sometimes they went riding again, exploring different parts of the territory. Other times they simply walked along the creek or sat on the porch of the boarding house and talked for hours. Catherine learned about his dreams of owning land, his love of working with horses, his quiet faith that showed itself in actions rather than words. Corey learned about her passion for teaching, her love of books and stories, her fierce loyalty to her family, and her complicated feelings about being so far from them. Letters continued to arrive from Philadelphia. Her mother's news remained worrying, Emma's recovery slower than anyone hoped, the financial situation always precarious. Catherine sent money when she could and wrote long letters full of encouragement and advice. But she no longer felt like she was living in suspended animation, waiting for her real life to begin. This was her real life, happening right now, and it held more beauty and possibility than she had imagined. In early August, a letter arrived that made Catherine's hands shake. Emma's fever had finally broken. The doctor declared her out of danger, though weak and in need of careful nursing. Catherine wept with relief and showed the letter to Corey when he came to town that Saturday. "This is wonderful news," he said, his own relief evident. "It is," Catherine agreed. "But the medical bills are enormous, and now they need a convalescence period with special food and continued care. My mother is trying to sound optimistic, but I can read the desperation between the lines." Corey was thoughtful for a moment. What if there was a way to bring in more money? Not just sending your salary, but raising funds specifically to help your family. "What do you mean?" "Silver Creek has social events all the time," Corey said. Box socials, barn dances, church fundraisers. What if we organized something with the proceeds going to your family? People here understand hardship, and they are generous when they know there is genuine need. Catherine stared at him. I could not possibly ask people to do that. You would not be asking, Corey pointed out. I would be organizing it with help from folks like Mrs. Rawlings. You would just have to accept the help, which I know is difficult for you, but sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing you can do. Catherine's throat felt tight. Why would people help me? I am practically a stranger here. You are not a stranger, Corey said firmly. You are the teacher who stays late to help children who are struggling. You are the woman who taught Mrs. Chen's daughter to read English so she can help in the family business. You are the person who organized books for the lending library and who never makes the Norwegian kids feel stupid for their accents. People notice these things, Catherine. You have made yourself part of this community whether you realize it or not. Catherine pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed by the idea. I do not know what to say. Say yes, Corey urged. Let us help. Let this place be what it can be, which is a home that takes care of its own. After a long moment, Catherine nodded. Yes, thank you, yes. The fundraiser came together with astonishing speed. Mrs. Rawlings took charge with the efficiency of a general organizing troops. She enlisted the other ranch wives, the church ladies, even some of the saloon workers who appreciated that Catherine treated their children the same as everyone else's. They decided on a barn dance and box social to be held at the Double R Ranch on the last Saturday of August. The publicity spread by word of mouth. Posters appeared in the general store and the saloons. Children told their parents, who told their neighbors, who told everyone they met. The story of the brave young teacher helping her family back east resonated with people who had their own stories of hardship and separation. Catherine was embarrassed by the attention at first, but the overwhelming kindness of the response humbled her. Women she barely knew stopped her on the street to say they would be attending. Men tipped their hats and promised to bid generously on the box suppers. Even the Chinese and Norwegian communities, often excluded from town events, made it clear they would be there. You see, Corey said when Catherine expressed her amazement. This is what community means. We are all struggling out here in our own ways, trying to build lives in a hard land. When we can help each other, we do. That is what makes it possible to survive and even thrive. The night of the fundraiser, the Rawlings barn had been transformed. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the swept floor. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by dozens of families. A makeshift stage held 3 musicians with a fiddle, a guitar and a banjo, already tuning their instruments. People streamed in from town and surrounding ranches, dressed in their best clothes and carrying the decorated boxes that would be auctioned off. Catherine wore her nicest dress, a blue cotton that Mrs. Rawlings had helped her freshen with new ribbons. Her own box supper, prepared with Mrs. Hedstrom's reluctant permission to use the boarding house kitchen, contained fried chicken, biscuits with jam, potato salad, and apple cake. She had decorated the box with ribbons and wildflowers, and her stomach fluttered with nervousness as she added it to the table with all the others. You look beautiful, Corey said, appearing at her elbow. He wore clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair neatly combed, and Catherine's breath caught at the sight of him. You clean up well yourself, she managed. I do my best, he said with a smile. Are you ready for this? I think so, Catherine said. It is overwhelming seeing all these people here. They are here because they care, Corey reminded her. Try to enjoy it. The evening was magical in ways Catherine could not have anticipated. The box supper auction raised a staggering amount of money, with men bidding enthusiastically, and the auctioneer keeping up a steady stream of jokes and encouragement. When Catherine's box came up, Corey bid aggressively, driving the price higher and higher until he won it for an amount that made Catherine gasp. "That was far too much," she whispered as he led her to a quiet corner to share the meal. "It was exactly right," Corey said. "This is for your sister, Catherine, for your family." "I would have paid twice as much if necessary." They ate together, the noise and laughter of the party swirling around them, but Catherine felt cocooned in a private bubble of warmth and gratitude. When the dancing started, Corey stood and offered his hand. "I should warn you, I am not a very good dancer," Catherine said. "Neither am I," Corey admitted. "But everyone else is dancing, so we will blend right in." He was right. The dancing was enthusiastic rather than skilled, with people of all ages stomping and whirling to the lively fiddle music. Corey held Catherine's hand and waist with a gentleness that made her heart race, guiding her through the steps with patient good humor when she stumbled. She laughed more than she had in years, dizzy with the music and the movement, and the sheer joy of being surrounded by people who cared. Between dances, various townspeople approached to greet her and wish her family well. Mrs. Chen pressed an envelope into her hands with money collected from the Chinese community. The Norwegian pastor's wife gave her a jar of honey and a promise of prayers. Even the gruff mine foreman, a man Catherine had thought disliked her, stopped by to say his wife thought highly of her teaching and he hoped the money would help. "I do not know how to thank everyone," Catherine said to Mrs. Rawlings during a break in the music. "You do not need to thank anyone," Mrs. Rawlings said warmly. "Just keep being who you are and doing what you are doing. That is thanks enough." As the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, Catherine found herself outside with Corey, looking up at the stars and listening to the distant music drifting from the barn. The air was cool and smelled of hay and horses, and the sage that grew wild in the surrounding fields. "I cannot believe this happened," Catherine said softly. "All these people coming together for someone they barely know." "They know you better than you think," Corey said. He was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling night air. "And I hope you are starting to understand that you belong here. Not just as a temporary visitor, but as someone who is part of the community. Someone who has a place and a purpose." Catherine turned to look at him, at his kind eyes and strong features softened by the starlight. "I am starting to understand," she admitted. "Thanks in large part to you. You kept pushing me to see this place differently, to give it a chance. I am grateful for that." "Catherine," Corey said, and something in his tone made her breath catch. "I need to tell you something, and I hope it does not make things awkward between us. Over these past months spending time with you, getting to know you, I have come to care for you deeply. More than deeply, if I am honest. I am falling in love with you and I wanted you to know, even if you do not feel the same way." Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. She had known her own feelings were developing into something more than friendship, but she had not dared to hope he felt the same. "Corey, I do feel the same way. I have been trying not to, because everything is so complicated and I am still figuring out my life, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel like myself in a way I have not felt since before my father died. You make me want to be brave." Corey reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his hands. "You are already brave," he said softly. "But if I can help you see that in yourself, then I am honored." He leaned in, and Catherine met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home. They kissed under the stars while the music played on in the barn behind them, and Catherine felt something settle into place inside her heart. This was where she was supposed to be. Not in spite of the distance from Philadelphia, but here, in this exact moment, with this exact man, in this wild and beautiful place that had become home without her quite noticing when it happened. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Corey rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said, "with everyone knowing my intentions. I want to build something with you, Catherine. A life, a future, whatever that looks like. I know you have responsibilities to your family, and I respect that. But I want to be part of your life in whatever way you will have me." "I want that too," Catherine said. "I want all of that. But Corey, I need to tell you that my first responsibility is still to my family. I cannot abandon them." "I would never ask you to," Corey said firmly. "We will figure it out together. Maybe there are ways to bring them west or help them more effectively from here. I do not have all the answers, but I know we can find them if we look together." Catherine kissed him again, pouring all her gratitude and hope and tentative joy into the gesture. When they finally returned to the barn, hand in hand, several people smiled knowingly, but no one commented directly. By the standards of frontier courting, their relationship had been unusually slow and proper, and no one would fault them for finally acknowledging what had been obvious to everyone else for weeks. The fundraiser had raised over $300, a staggering sum that made Catherine weep when Mrs. Rawlings presented her with the envelope. It was enough to pay off most of her mother's debts and cover Emma's medical expenses, with money left over for food and necessities. Catherine sent it east immediately with a long letter explaining what the community had done and how grateful she was. Her mother's response, arriving in mid-September, was full of tears and blessings. Emma was recovering well, gaining strength each day. Louisa had found respectable work as a seamstress at a shop that paid fairly. Margaret had reluctantly accepted a position as a governess for a wealthy family. The money Catherine had sent was a literal answer to prayers, and her mother wanted to know all about the people who had been so generous. Catherine wrote back with stories of Silver Creek and its inhabitants, and for the first time, her letters home were full of warmth and affection for the place she lived rather than just dutiful reports. She wrote about her students and their progress. She wrote about the beauty of the mountains and the way the aspens were starting to turn gold as autumn approached. And she wrote about Corey, about his kindness and his steady presence, and the way he made her feel like she could handle anything. Her mother wrote back with careful questions and gentle encouragement. She missed Catherine terribly, she said, but it sounded like she had found something precious in Montana, and her mother would not wish her to give that up out of misplaced obligation. They would manage in Philadelphia, especially now that the debts were cleared and all three older girls were working. Catherine should build the life she wanted, wherever that might be. The permission to be happy to stay, to build a life in Montana without guilt settled over Catherine like a blessing. She showed the letter to Corey, and he held her while she cried tears of relief and gratitude. Autumn transformed the Montana territory into something out of a painting. The aspens turned gold just as Corey had promised, whole mountainsides blazing with color. The air grew crisp and smelled of wood smoke and changing seasons. Catherine's students came to school bundled in coats and scarves, their cheeks pink from the cold, and she taught them with renewed energy and purpose. Corey courted her with old-fashioned formality that touched her heart. He brought her wildflowers that he picked on his rides. He carved her a wooden box with her initials on the lid for storing her papers. He came to town every Saturday without fail, and they walked together or rode out to see the changing colors or simply sat and talked for hours. He never pressured her for more than she was ready to give, content to let their relationship develop at its own pace. In October, Mrs. Hedstrom announced she was selling the boarding house and moving to California to live with her daughter. Catherine panicked briefly about where she would live, but Mrs. Rawlings immediately offered her a room at the ranch. "You could help with the younger children's lessons," she said, "and Tommy adores you. Plus, you would be closer to a certain cowboy who spends a lot of time moping around when you are not here." "I do not mope," Corey protested, but he was grinning. Catherine accepted gratefully, and the move to the ranch felt like another step toward belonging. Her room was small but cozy, with a window overlooking the mountains and a stove that kept it warm even on the coldest nights. She ate meals with the Rawlings family, helped Mrs. Rawlings with household tasks, and spent her evenings preparing lessons or reading by lamplight. And she saw Corey every day. They fell into an easy rhythm of stolen moments, meeting by the corrals after dinner, walking together in the crisp evening air, sitting together during family gatherings. The physical side of their relationship remained chaste by necessity, given that they lived under the watchful eyes of the Rawlings family, but the emotional intimacy deepened with each passing day. In November, as the first snow began to dust the mountain peaks, Corey asked her to take a ride with him. It was a cold Saturday morning, the sky bright and clear, and Catherine bundled up in layers of wool and the warm coat Mrs. Rawlings had lent her. Corey led her to a piece of land about 3 miles from the ranch, a gentle valley with a creek running through it and good grazing land stretching in all directions. "This is it," he said, pride evident in his voice. "I signed the papers yesterday, 160 acres all mine, or rather ours if you will have me." Catherine stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "Corey, what are you saying?" He dismounted and helped her down, then pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a single small stone. "I am saying that I love you, Catherine Morrison. I am saying that I want to build a life with you on this land, raise children and cattle and a future together. I am saying that I want you to be my wife, if you will have me. I know I am just a cowboy without much to my name yet, but I am hardworking and I love you with everything I have, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy if you will let me." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes. I love you, Corey. I want all of that. I want to build a life with you." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her with a fervor that made her forget the cold. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, he said, "We can write to your mother and sisters, invite them to the wedding. Maybe they could even come west for a visit, or if they wanted to stay. There is room here for everyone." "That is a beautiful thought," Catherine said. "I will write to them tonight." They spent the rest of the morning walking the land that would be their future home, planning where to build a house and where to put corrals, and which section had the best water. Corey talked about the cattle he hoped to buy in the spring and the horses he wanted to raise. Catherine talked about continuing to teach, maybe even building a better schoolhouse for Silver Creek. They dreamed together, their words turning to mist in the cold air, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The wedding was planned for December, giving Catherine's family time to respond and make arrangements if they wanted to attend. Mrs. Rawlings threw herself into preparations with enthusiastic energy, enlisting half the town to help. Catherine wrote letter after letter to Philadelphia, and the responses came back full of excitement and complicated logistics. Her mother could not travel, but she sent her blessing and a beautiful handkerchief that had belonged to Catherine's grandmother. Louisa could not leave her work, but she sent a detailed letter full of advice and love. Margaret, however, announced that she was coming, and she was bringing Emma, whose health had improved enough for travel. They would arrive 2 weeks before the wedding and stay through the new year. Catherine cried when she read Margaret's letter, overwhelmed with joy at the thought of seeing her sisters again. Corey held her and promised to do everything he could to make their visit wonderful. When Margaret and Emma arrived in early December, stepping off the train in their Eastern clothes and looking around Silver Creek with wide eyes, Catherine ran to embrace them, laughing and crying all at once. They were thinner than she remembered, Emma especially still showing the effects of her illness. But they were here, solid and real, and Catherine could not stop hugging them. Corey met them with quiet courtesy, helping with their bags and driving them to the ranch in the wagon. Catherine watched her sisters carefully observing him, taking his measure, and she held her breath hoping they would approve. That night, after dinner with the Rawlings family, the three sisters sat together in Catherine's room like they used to do at home, and Margaret said, "He is wonderful, Catherine. You chose well." "He is everything," Catherine agreed. "He helped me find myself when I was lost." "Tell us everything," Emma demanded, looking more animated than she had since they arrived. "How you met, how he proposed, all of it." Catherine told them the whole story, starting with that day on the general store steps when Corey had found her crying over their mother's letter. She told them about the ride to the Aspen Ridge, the fundraiser, the slow development of their relationship, and finally his proposal on the land that would be their home. Her sisters listened with rapt attention, interrupting occasionally with questions or exclamations. "It is like something from a novel," Margaret said dreamily. "The brave teacher and the noble cowboy finding love in the wilderness." "It is not quite that romantic," Catherine said, laughing. "There is a lot of hard work and worry mixed in with the beauty." "All the best love stories have both," Emma said wisely. At 15, she was already perceptive beyond her years. "The real question is, are you happy, truly happy?" Catherine considered the question, then smiled. "I am. I did not think I could be so far from home and everything familiar, but this has become home. These people, this place, Corey most of all. I am happier than I have been since before Papa died." "Then we are happy for you," Margaret said firmly, "and we will help make your wedding perfect." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Margaret and Emma charmed everyone they met, adapting to frontier life with more ease than Catherine had managed. Emma spent hours sketching the mountains and the ranch, filling a notebook with images to take home to their mother. Margaret helped Mrs. Rawlings with the endless cooking and preparation, and she flirted shamelessly with some of the young ranch hands, much to Catherine's amusement. The wedding was set for December 20th in Silver Creek's small church. The whole town planned to attend, and people came from surrounding ranches as well, eager to celebrate the popular teacher's marriage. Mrs. Rawlings had recruited a dozen women to help prepare food for the reception, and the church ladies had decorated the building with pine boughs and ribbons. On the morning of her wedding, Catherine woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. Margaret and Emma helped her dress in the gown they had brought from Philadelphia, a beautiful cream-colored dress that had been their mother's wedding gown, altered to fit Catherine. Margaret arranged Catherine's hair in an elaborate style, and Emma placed wildflowers, carefully preserved and dried, in the braids. "You look like a princess," Emma breathed. "You look like yourself," Margaret corrected, "but the very best version, happy and loved and home, Mr. Rawlings had agreed to walk Catherine down the aisle in place of her father, a gesture that touched her deeply. When the moment came and she took his arm, her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. But then the doors opened, and she saw Corey standing at the front of the church in his best suit, his eyes locked on her with an expression of such love and wonder that everything else faded away. She walked down the aisle past faces she had come to know and care about over the past year, Mrs. Chen and her family, the Norwegian pastor and his wife, Tommy Rawlings and his siblings, the miners and cowboys and shopkeepers who made up Silver Creek's eclectic community, all of them smiling, all of them genuinely happy for her happiness. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Catherine heard herself make her vows, heard Corey make his, felt him slip a second ring onto her finger to sit beside the engagement ring. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Corey kissed her to cheers and applause from the assembled crowd. The reception at the ranch was everything a frontier wedding should be: loud, joyous, full of good food and better company. There was dancing and toasts and laughter that rang off the rafters. Catherine danced with her new husband, with Mr. Rawlings, with Tommy, with what felt like half the men in Silver Creek. Margaret and Emma danced until they were breathless, and Emma's cheeks had more color than Catherine had seen in months. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Corey pulled Catherine aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Corrigan?" The name sent a thrill through her. More than ready. They had prepared the small cabin on their new land for their wedding night. It was rough still, just one large room with a stone fireplace and basic furniture, but Corey and some of the ranch hands had worked for weeks to make it warm and weatherproof. Someone, probably Mrs. Rawlings, had left flowers on the table and stocked the shelves with food. Corey carried Catherine over the threshold, and she laughed at the old-fashioned gesture. He set her down gently and lit the lamps, bathing the room in warm golden light. A fire was already laid in the fireplace, needing only a match to spring to life. "Welcome home," Corey said softly. Catherine looked around the simple cabin and felt her heart swell. It is perfect. Everything is perfect. That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal reverence. Afterwards, lying wrapped in blankets with Corey's arms around her and the fire crackling in the hearth, Catherine felt at peace in a way she had never experienced before. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly the right person, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility and promise. Margaret and Emma stayed through the new year, and Catherine treasured every moment with them. They helped her set up the cabin, adding small touches that made it feel like home. Emma painted a picture of the view from their front door as a wedding present, and Margaret sewed curtains for the windows. When the time came for them to leave, the goodbye was tearful but not desperate. They would write often, Catherine promised, and maybe next year she and Corey could visit Philadelphia. Or better yet, maybe Margaret and Emma could come back to Montana, perhaps even to stay if they wished. "I would like that," Emma said. "It is beautiful here and there is so much to paint." "And the Cowboys are quite handsome," Margaret added with a grin. Making them all laugh after her sisters left, Catherine settled into married life with surprising ease. She continued teaching, riding into Silver Creek 3 days a week to hold classes. The other days she spent working on their homestead, learning the 1,000 skills required to build a life in this place. Corey taught her to ride better, to recognize the signs of weather changes, to identify edible plants and dangerous animals. The winter was long and sometimes harsh, but they weathered it together, keeping each other warm through blizzards and cold snaps. In the evenings, Catherine would read aloud while Corey worked on repairing tack or carving useful items from wood. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their days and their dreams and their fears. Spring came late to Montana but glorious when it finally arrived. The snow melted in rushing torrents down the mountainsides, filling the creek on their land to overflowing. Wildflowers exploded across the meadows in a riot of color that made Catherine gasp with delight every time she saw it. Corey bought their first cattle, a small herd of 20 head that would form the foundation of their ranch. In May, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Corey one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. He whooped with joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully as if she were made of glass, making her laugh at the sudden shift. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Catherine confirmed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," Corey admitted, "but also so excited I can barely breathe. A child, Catherine, our child, raised here with all this beauty and freedom around them. Can you imagine? Catherine could imagine, and the picture filled her with joy. A child running through their meadow, learning to ride at Corey's side, growing up strong and healthy in this wild land. It was a future she had never dared to dream of a year ago, but now it seemed not only possible but real and close enough to touch. She wrote to her family with the news, and their responses were full of excitement and advice. Her mother sent a long letter with guidance about pregnancy and childbirth, along with the baby blanket she had made for all her daughters when they were born. Louisa sent practical items and a list of things Catherine should prepare. Margaret sent ridiculous and impractical baby clothes that nevertheless made Catherine smile. And Emma sent a series of drawings imagining what the baby might look like. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Catherine continued teaching until she grew too large and uncomfortable, then turned her classes over to a young woman who had recently arrived in Silver Creek and was eager for the work. She spent her days at the cabin, sewing baby clothes and preparing the small room they had added onto the house specifically for the nursery. Corey was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly worrying about her health and safety. Mrs. Rawlings finally took him aside and told him to give Catherine some space to breathe, and he sheepishly backed off, though Catherine caught him watching her with protective concern whenever he thought she was not looking. Their son was born on a cold November night during the first snowstorm of the season. Mrs. Rawlings attended the birth, along with a midwife from town, and after 12 hours of labor that tested Catherine's strength to its limits, she held her baby boy and thought she had never seen anything more perfect. He had Corey's dark hair and Catherine's blue eyes, and he was strong and healthy with lungs that proved themselves immediately. "He is beautiful," Corey breathed, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Catherine, he is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him William James Corrigan, after both their fathers. Little Will, as he quickly became known, filled their cabin with noise and joy and an exhausting amount of work. Catherine had never been so tired or so happy. She marveled at every tiny finger and toe, every expression that crossed his small face, every milestone no matter how minor. Letters flew back and forth to Philadelphia more frequently now, with Catherine filling pages with details about Will's development, and her mother responding with advice and encouragement. Emma sent drawings of the nephew she had not yet met, and Margaret wrote that she was saving money for another visit, hopefully bringing their mother this time. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Corey's careful management and hard work paid off, the herd growing each year through purchases and calves born on their land. They hired a young cowboy to help with the work, a quiet Norwegian boy named Lars who was eager to learn. Catherine returned to teaching part-time once Will was old enough, bringing him with her to school and letting the older students help watch him during lessons. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Will grew from baby to toddler to a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. When he was 3, Catherine became pregnant again, and this time their daughter arrived in the spring, a tiny red-faced girl they named Emma Margaret after both her aunts. Little Emmy was quieter than Will but just as determined, and she had Corey's steady temperament. The homestead grew as well. They added rooms to the cabin, transforming it into a proper house. They built a barn and expanded the corrals. Their herd increased to over 100 head, and they acquired a small group of horses that Corey bred and trained, developing a reputation for quality stock. The land that had seemed so empty when Corey first bought it was now dotted with cattle, crisscrossed with fences, and marked by the solid structures they had built with their own hands. Catherine's family in Philadelphia remained close through letters and occasional visits. Margaret did eventually bring their mother west, and the older woman spent 3 months with them, marveling at the life her daughter had built. She held her grandchildren and cried tears of joy, telling Catherine that this was everything she had hoped for her when she encouraged her to go west all those years ago. Louiser remained in Philadelphia, eventually marrying a steady clerk and starting her own family. Emma, true to her artistic nature, moved to San Francisco to study painting, but she came to Montana every summer, documenting the territory's beauty in her art. One of her paintings of the Aspen Ridge, where Corey had first taken Catherine, eventually hung in a gallery in New York, and she credited Montana with teaching her to see light and color in new ways. Silver Creek grew from a rough mining town into an established community. The school Catherine had started in that leaky one-room building expanded into a proper 2-room schoolhouse with a second teacher. The town got a telegraph office, a newspaper, and eventually even electric lights. Some of the old-timers grumbled about progress ruining the frontier spirit, but most folks appreciated the improvements. Through it all, Catherine and Corey's love deepened and matured. They faced hardships, inevitable in frontier life. Harsh winters that killed cattle, drought years when water ran scarce, illnesses that had to be weathered without easy access to doctors. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Corey took Catherine back to the Aspen Ridge, where he had first started to fall in love with her. The children stayed with the Rawlings family, giving them a rare day alone together. They rode up the familiar trail, older and more weathered than they had been a decade before, but comfortable in their own skin and each other's company. At the top of the ridge, looking out over the territory that had become home, Corey took Catherine's hand. "Do you remember that day I found you crying on the general store steps?" he asked. "I remember everything about that day," Catherine said. "I was so lost and lonely, convinced I had made a terrible mistake coming west." "And I told you this place could be home too if you let it," Corey said. "Did I turn out to be right?" Catherine looked at him, at his weathered face and the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, at the hands calloused from a decade of hard work, at the eyes that still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Then she looked out at the valley below, at the mountains and forests and sky that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. She thought about their house with its warmth and laughter, about their children growing strong and healthy, about the community that had embraced her and made her one of their own. "You were right," she said softly. "This is home. Not just the place, but everything it represents. The life we have built, the family we have made, the future we are creating together. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." Corey pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Catherine Corrigan. Thank you for taking a chance on this place and on me." "I love you too," Catherine said. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself. Thank you for being patient while I found my way. Thank you for everything." They sat together on that ridge for a long time, watching the afternoon light paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. The aspens rustled around them, their leaves singing in the breeze, and Catherine thought about how many moments like this they had shared and how many more stretched ahead of them. That night, they returned home to their children, to the house they had built, to the life they had carved out of this wild and beautiful land. Will ran to greet them, full of stories about his day, while Emmy toddled after him on unsteady legs. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of bread baking and wood smoke and home. As Catherine tucked her children into bed that night, listening to their sleepy breathing and feeling Corey's presence in the doorway behind her, she thought about that letter she had received so long ago, the one that had left her crying and hopeless on those general store steps. She thought about how certain she had been that she was in the wrong place. That home was something fixed and unchangeable, located in a specific city 2,000 miles away. She had been so wrong. Home was not a place. It was a feeling, a sense of belonging that you carried inside yourself. It was the people who loved you and the land that challenged you and the life you built with your own hands and heart. It was sitting under the stars with someone who understood you, teaching children who looked to you for guidance, watching your own babies sleep in the house you made together. Montana had taught her that. This wild, harsh, beautiful territory had broken her open and rebuilt her stronger. The people here, with their generosity and resilience and fierce loyalty, had shown her what community really meant. And Corey, with his patience and kindness and steady love, had helped her see that letting go of one home did not mean abandoning it, but rather expanding your heart to hold more than you thought possible. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Will grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, while Emmy showed her aunt's artistic talent along with a fierce intelligence that reminded everyone of her mother. They had 2 more children in the years that followed, another boy and girl who filled the house with laughter and noise and love. The ranch prospered beyond their early dreams. They bought more land, expanded the herd, and became one of the more successful cattle operations in the territory. But success never changed who they were at their core. They remained generous with their neighbors, active in the community, always willing to help someone struggling the way others had helped them when they were starting out. Catherine continued teaching off and on throughout her life, taking breaks when her children were young, but always returning to the classroom eventually. She educated 2 generations of Silver Creek's children, and many of her students went on to colleges back east or to successful businesses in the growing towns of Montana. Some stayed and became ranchers and merchants and teachers themselves, carrying forward the lessons she had taught them. Mrs. Rawlings became one of Catherine's dearest friends, a relationship that lasted until the older woman's death at the age of 78. Tommy Rawlings grew up to take over his father's ranch and married one of Catherine's former students, a girl who had been just as wild and curious as he had been. The Rawlings and Corrigan families remained close through the generations, their ranches side by side, their children playing together and eventually intermarrying, weaving their families together in the way of small communities. Silver Creek itself transformed from a rough mining town into a proper city, though it never lost its frontier character entirely. The mines eventually played out, but by then other industries had taken root. The territory became a state, and people who had once been dismissed as backwoods settlers became the founding fathers and mothers of Montana, their stories told and retold to new generations. Catherine kept every letter her family ever sent her, storing them carefully in the wooden box Corey had carved for her decades before. She reread them sometimes, tracing the arc of her sisters' lives through their words. Lewis's growing family, Margaret's adventures and eventual settling down with a merchant in Philadelphia, Emma's artistic success, and her eventual marriage to a fellow painter. Her mother lived to 87, long enough to see all her daughters happy and settled, long enough to meet most of her many grandchildren. When she died peacefully in her sleep, Catherine mourned but also felt grateful. Her mother had suffered so much in those years after her father's death, but she had lived to see better times, to know that her daughters were all thriving and successful in their own ways. Catherine and Corey grew old together on their ranch, their bodies weathered by years of hard work and Montana weather, but their love undiminished. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared experiences, and deepened by the life they had built together. They worked side by side until they were too old for the hardest labor, then gradually handed over the ranch operations to Will while remaining active advisors and doting grandparents to his children. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch house for a celebration that spanned 3 days. People came from all over Montana, some from as far away as California and Pennsylvania, to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. There were speeches and toasts, and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. But Catherine's favorite moment came late on the first evening, when most of the guests had settled into conversation or gone to bed. She and Corey slipped away to the front porch, sitting in the rocking chairs they had occupied for decades, looking out at the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. 50 years, Corey said wonderingly. Half a century of marriage, I can barely believe it. 50 years since I said yes to you, Catherine corrected with a smile. But really, it started before that. It started the day you found me crying over that letter and told me this place could be home too. I was right, was I not? Corey asked the same question he had asked her on their 10th anniversary and their 25th and numerous times in between. You were right, Catherine confirmed, as she always did. But then she added something new. But it was not just about letting the place be home, it was about letting myself be home. Learning to be present in my own life instead of always looking backward or forward, always wishing I was somewhere or someone else. You taught me that, Corey. You taught me to be here fully and completely in each moment. We taught each other, Corey said, reaching for her hand. His grip was not as strong as it once had been, his fingers knotted with arthritis, but the gesture was as meaningful as ever. You taught me that love is not just about grand gestures. It is about showing up every day, doing the work, choosing each other over and over again. You taught me what partnership really means. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars come out one by one. The same stars they had watched together for 50 years, from this same porch, through all the seasons of their life together. Somewhere in the house behind them, their family laughed and talked, the sound of it washing over them like music. I have no regrets, Catherine said suddenly, about any of it. Coming west, falling in love with you, building this life. I thought I was running away from home, but really I was running toward it. I just did not know it at the time. No regrets here either, Corey said. You are my home, Catherine, always have been, from that first day I saw you crying on those steps. I knew somehow that you were important, that you were going to change my life. I did not know how right I was. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. I love you, James Corrigan, more now than ever, if that is even possible. It is possible, Corey assured her, because I feel the same. Love is not finite. It just keeps growing, filling all the spaces in your life, spilling over into everything you do. You taught me that too. They rocked gently in their chairs, surrounded by family and land and a lifetime of memories. Catherine thought about the girl she had been, crying over a letter from home and feeling utterly lost. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, all the steps and stumbles and soaring moments that had brought her here. She thought about the people who had helped her along the way, the community that had embraced her, the man who had loved her through it all. And she thought about the words Corey had spoken to her so long ago, words that had seemed impossible at the time but had proven to be the truest thing anyone had ever told her. This place can be home too. Just let it, she had let it. She had opened her heart to this wild territory and its people, had allowed herself to plant roots in soil she had thought was just temporary ground. And in return, Montana had given her everything she never knew she needed. A purpose that fulfilled her, a community that sustained her, a love that completed her, and a life so rich and full that she could not have imagined it in her wildest dreams. The house behind them gradually quieted as people went to bed. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. A coyote called in the distance, its song rising and falling in the night air. And on the porch of the house they had built with their own hands, on the land they had claimed and cultivated, Catherine and Corey rocked gently in their chairs, hands clasped, hearts full, completely and utterly home. Catherine lived to be 89 years old, sharp-minded and beloved until the very end. She passed peacefully one autumn morning, the aspens turning gold outside her window, Corey holding her hand and telling her one more time how much he loved her. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, filling the church and spilling out into the street, everyone wanting to pay respects to the woman who had taught them or their children or their grandchildren, who had been part of the community's foundation for over 6 decades. Corey followed her just 8 months later, dying in his sleep in the bed they had shared for 53 years. Their children laid them to rest side by side in the Silver Creek Cemetery under a shared headstone that reads simply, Catherine and James Corrigan, partners in life and love, home at last. Their ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations. The house they built was carefully maintained, becoming a touchstone for their descendants, a place where family gathered for holidays and celebrations. Will's children brought their children there, and those children brought their own, each generation adding to the story but always remembering the foundation that Catherine and Corey had laid. The wooden box that Corey had carved, the one Catherine had kept her letters in, was preserved as a family treasure. Inside were not just the letters from Philadelphia, but also the journal where Catherine had recorded 3 good things every day, starting from that first entry about the cowboy who had shown her kindness. Her descendants read those entries and marveled at how their strong, confident ancestor had once been so lost and uncertain, and they took comfort in knowing that finding your way was possible even when you could not see the path ahead. The story of how Catherine and Corey met and fell in love became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about courage and kindness, about the importance of community and the power of letting yourself be vulnerable. It was a story about what home really means, and how sometimes the place you are running away from is actually the place you need to be. Most of all, it was a story about love. Romantic love, yes, but also love of place and purpose, love of community and calling, love that transforms both the lover and the beloved. And somewhere in the retelling, usually when the family gathered at the ranch house with the mountains rising beyond and the creek singing its endless song, someone would always quote the words that had started it all, the words that had changed Catherine's life and set everything in motion. This place can be home too. Just let it. Those words became a family motto of sorts, applied not just to physical places but to new experiences, difficult transitions, uncertain futures. When faced with something unfamiliar or frightening, the Corrigans reminded each other to open their hearts, to give the new thing a chance, to trust that home was not a fixed point but an expanding circle that could always grow larger. It was Catherine and Corey's greatest gift to their descendants, that understanding that home is something you create rather than something you find, and that love is the foundation on which all homes are built. The Montana Territory they had known changed beyond recognition over the decades and centuries. The frontier closed, the wilderness was tamed. Technology transformed everything from ranching methods to communication to transportation. But some things remained constant. The mountains still rose toward the sky, ancient and unmovable. The aspens still turned gold every autumn, painting the hillsides with fire. The stars still blazed in the night sky, bright and infinite and beautiful. And people still came to Montana seeking something, running from something else, hoping to build lives in this big, harsh, magnificent landscape. Some of them found what Catherine had found, a place where they could be fully themselves, where the work was hard but meaningful, where community mattered and love could flourish. Some of them learned what she had learned. That home is not about returning to something you left behind, but about moving forward into something new and allowing it to become yours. Some of them discovered what she had discovered, that the most important journeys are not measured in miles, but in the distance traveled inside your own heart. And if any of them had been able to sit on that ranch house porch with Catherine in her old age and ask her what advice she would give to someone feeling lost and far from home, she would have told them exactly what Corey told her all those years ago. She would have looked them in the eye with that direct, kind gaze that had seen so much joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, and she would have said, "This place can be home too, just let it." Open your heart to where you are, to who you are with, to what you are doing. Plant your roots and tend them carefully. Build your life with intention and love. Be present in each moment rather than always looking backward or forward. Find your people and let them find you. And most of all, trust that you are exactly where you need to be, even if you cannot see it yet. Trust the journey, trust yourself, trust love. Everything else will follow. That was Catherine's legacy, distilled down to its essence. Not the successful ranch or the generations of educated children or even the long, loving marriage, as significant as all those things were. Her real legacy was the understanding that home is a choice, that belonging is something you create, and that love, in all its forms, is what makes life worth living. She arrived in Montana, a frightened girl convinced she was in the wrong place, and she left it a woman who had found exactly where she was supposed to be all along. The journey between those 2 points was her story, and it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth carrying forward into the future. It was a story that proved that sometimes the best thing you can do is stop running from where you are and start running toward who you could become. Sometimes the place that feels most foreign becomes the place that knows you best. Sometimes a cowboy finds you crying over a letter, and his simple words of wisdom change the entire trajectory of your life. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, you discover that home was never a place at all. It was always right there inside you, waiting for you to recognize it, claim it, and let it bloom into something beautiful.